34º Simposio Internacional
SOMECE 2021.
Transformación Digital e Innovación Educativa.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Bueno, más bien ya son buenas tardes. Es un gusto saludarlos y presentar a ustedes la siguiente conferencia magistral. Seguramente ustedes han notado que a lo largo de este simposio, desde que inició hoy a las 8 de la mañana, se ha mencionado en repetidas ocasiones el método de aula invertida, como un método a seguir en esta coyuntura socioeducativa que nos encontramos. Entonces, es verdaderamente un lujo contar con la presencia del líder educativo Jon Bergmann. Cuando el doctor Jon Bergmann empezó a enseñar en 1986, lo hacía de forma tradicional y se consideraba un buen conferencista, pero después de 19 años de enseñanza, se dio cuenta de que tenía que haber una forma mejor. Jon es uno de los pioneros del movimiento Flip Classroom o aula invertida y lidera la adopción mundial del aprendizaje invertido. Ha trabajado con gobiernos, escuelas, empresas y organizaciones educativas sin ánimo de lucro. Jon ha coordinado y guiado proyectos de aprendizaje invertido en todo el mundo, en los lugares en los que ha trabajado. Por ejemplo, se encuentra China, Taiwán, México, por ejemplo. A mí me tocó conocerlo justamente en un taller que dio en la Universidad Iberoamericana hace algunos años. También ha trabajado en Corea, en Australia, en Nueva Zelanda, Oriente Medio, Islandia, Suecia, Noruega, Reino Unido, España, Alemania, India, Sudamérica y, por supuesto, Estados Unidos. Jon Bergmann es autor de 10 libros, entre ellos el más vendido se llama Flip Your Classroom, que ha sido traducido a 13 idiomas. Él ha sido educador durante 34 años, con 26 años como profesor de aula. En el 2002, Jon recibió el Premio Presidencial a la Excelencia en la Enseñanza de las Matemáticas y las Ciencias. Y en el 2010 fue nombrado semifinalista para el Profesor del Año de Colorado. También forma parte del Consejo Asesor de TED Education, además de escribir y hablar sobre Fit and Mastering Learning o aprendizaje invertido de dominio. Jon enseña ciencias en tiempo completo y dirige el desarrollo de personal en la Houston Christian High School. ¿Okay? Puede usted saber más sobre él en el sitio jonbergmann.com. ¿Okay? Entonces, sin más, vamos a escuchar la presentación de Jon Bergmann titulada, el título es una pregunta: Rethinking Education, How Flipped and Mastering Learning Can Help Us Post-Pandemic. Repensando la educación, cómo el aprendizaje invertido de dominio puede ayudarnos después de una pandemia. Mientras Jon da su conferencia, nosotros vamos a estar poniendo atención a sus comentarios, ya sea en Facebook o en YouTube, y vamos a interrumpir más o menos 2 veces la conferencia para ponerlo al tanto de las preguntas y que nos vaya dando una retroalimentación sobre esos comentarios. Pues adelante, Jon. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. As I said in Spanish, I mean, since this symposium started at 8 o'clock, every single lecturer has mentioned flipped classroom. Okay, so it's your turn.
So I have a lot to stand up to. Everyone's talking how awesome flipped learning is, and I agree. I think it's awesome. But what we want to do today is, first of all, I want to say thank you. Let me get my presentation up here. I want to say thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you all. And oops, said that wrong. And yeah, me gusta Mexico. Visitar Mexico, muchos tiempos. Yeah. So how do we rethink education, especially when we think about flipped and mastery learning? How can it help us in a post-pandemic world? Now, I'm also realizing that the pandemic has been such a hard thing for all of us as teachers. It's been hard for us in Estados Unidos. And I know it's been especially hard for those of you who are in Mexico and in all of Latin America. And I understand that. But I want to start with just an interesting thing. I did this a number of years ago before the pandemic. I Googled the word classroom followed by a country code, right? And this is what I found. This is what a classroom looks like in the Estados Unidos, Taiwan, Japan, Uganda, Tibet, Egipto, Medio East, China, India, the Himalayan mountains, montañas de Himalayan, Vietnam, Peru, in rich countries, in developing countries, professional development or adult learning, in the military, and in prison. So that's what classrooms look like before the pandemic, right? And then and here's one's in Chile. And I want you to imagine a world, though, where we live in a pandemic world. And so I thought I would do the same exercise and ask the question, what do classes look like in the pandemic? So I Googled COVID in school with images, and these are the pictures that I found. Taiwan, Argentina. Remember this? Empty classroom teaching on Zoom. University of Oklahoma, Pantheon University, Francia, Japan, University de Kentucky, the Vatican, South Korea, the United Kingdom, or just as what your class looks like, just somewhere on Zoom. This is Stanford Medical School. That's how they've been doing it. Furman University, Harvard University, Indonesia, South Korea, Brookings Institute, New York University, Estados Unidos. So what are we facing? What is that we're going to face when and if we ever get done with this pandemic? And we will, folks. We're going to be done with this pandemic. You know, a que nos entrafamos. What are we going to face? And I think the answer is we're facing, and I'm seeing this in my class, I'm sure you are too, is we're seeing a learning loss, pérdida de aprendizaje. We're facing students who are lost. So right now I teach high school, so secondary school, 16, 17 y 18 estudiantes. They're 17 and 18 years old. They are behind. I teach chemistry and physics, and as I'm really discovering, particularly my students are coming in with very significant mathematical gaps. They have learning loss. And that's what I'm seeing in my classes. And I know you're going to see this or you've already seen it. And here's an interesting study done by the World Bank. They studied 120 million of the regions. Now, this doesn't include Mexico. It's Central and South America. And they asked the question, basically, what have they lost there? And then they studied, many millones de niños, and they said, what kind of a loss are the students having? And this is what they said. They said learning losses will be substantially larger for children in the lowest income quintile, widening the already high socioeconomic education achievement gap by 12%. So World Bank in 2021, this year, said that we're facing a crisis of students who've lost a year of learning, maybe, or something like that, right? And even if you teach in an exclusive university in Mexico or Chile or Peru or wherever you're from, you're seeing the same thing. I teach at a school that is kept open most of the time through the pandemic, and we're seeing the same learning losses. And it's going to be much, much worse if you are teaching students who have been in Zoom classes for a long period of time. In the World Bank study, they made 6 key recommendations. Here they are in Spanish. And I really want to just focus on one of them. I'll just zoom in on that one right here, and that's this one. And this is that teachers, the big recommendation from the World Bank is that teachers and principals will need to be supported to obtain the skills to optimize the alteration alternation of in-person and remote activities so that you'll be able to go back from in-person and to remote activities. So this is one of the huge recommendations. And I don't know if you've seen this, but I have, is that I've seen so many teachers, even though I continue to teach, I have this great privilege of having an opportunity to interact with teachers all over the globe. Next week, for example, I'm speaking via Zoom or whatever in Chile. Last week I was speaking in India. It changes. So I'm connecting with educators globally, and as I learn from this is a problem that we're seeing all over the world: is that teachers were unprepared for the pandemic, and they continue to feel unprepared for the pandemic. And maybe those of you who are tuning in on Zoom or in YouTube or Facebook, whatever, that you are also feeling that pinch. How you feel unprepared. So now what I'd like us to do is, based on that really quick introduction, I want you to have some Q&A, and it's really, I want you to focus in on how are you reacting to those images that I just showed? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and maybe a question or two.
Okay. For now, we have basically some greetings from people who are watching this lecture from Hidalgo or Zacatenco, El Politécnico, and from other teachers that are basically saying hi. So I think.
So my question for those who are out there listening, what I'd love you to say is, or ask, what's your reaction? Maybe it's just, what is your reaction to seeing those images, the images of schools before COVID and now in COVID? Do you feel like you see, to me, that we have a problem? As I live in Houston, we like to say, Houston, we have a problem. Do you see the problem, and what do you see it as?
Okay. So we're writing this question in Spanish too right now, so we can have some answers. And when we do, I will tell you. I will let you know. Okay.
So Ricardo, you've just seen this for the first time. Maybe you could just respond. What are some images? What are seeing those images? What was your thoughts?
Okay. Well, when I saw that, I saw this problem that we're having. It was big in Mexico. But when we think of other countries, we say, oh, that is not happening there. I mean, they're not having this kind of problems. I mean, how can you think that they might have some issues the way we do? Okay, so what I think calls our attention is that these kind of issues are happening in other countries too. And so we're not the only ones. So I think that's one of the things.
That's a very good thought. Yeah. Schools look the same almost everywhere.
Right. And sometimes, for example, I think these problems shouldn't have happened. Okay. Because, for example, you have been teaching about flipped learning since some years ago. I mean, since a while ago. So maybe if we had listened to you before, or if we have done things like that before, when we had these problems, we would be facing them, I mean, in a more natural way. And we wouldn't be talking about a problem. We wouldn't be saying that we haven't wasted time in learning. I mean, and you're talking about the risks that we have had, and maybe sometimes people think that we have lost a lot in the learning.
You say that, Ricardo, and something interesting popped in my head just as the pandemic was getting started. This was not original with me, but one of the leading flipped learning people in the world tweeted this out. They said, "The pandemic, what flipped learning teachers have been preparing for the past 10 years." And I think that's another interesting sort of data point, as I've talked with flipped learning teachers all over the world since the pandemic started, 2 years ago now, or whatever it's been now, is every single one of them, now this is hundreds of ones I've had interactions with, has been asked by their school, by their university, to help figure out how to do learning, because they thought, oh, this guy knows what to do, this gal knows what to do, help us out. because they realized that flipped learning could really help them with the pandemic, and it has. But still, there's many who need extra help. So tell you what, why don't we go back into the presentation, so to speak. Let me share some more.
Yeah, I'm going to just mention a few questions that
Go.
came up. For example, Olivia Garduño dice, I feel worried. How can we support the learning gaps? We feel so, stressful. Then Minerva says, I think the problem, this problem is a worldwide problem. Okay.
It is.
Alex,
good news.
Say excellent presentation. I'm going to, and then, well, that's basically what we have.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand. You're nervioso. And the good news is I am going to make an audacious claim that I know how to solve this problem. And I have some answers for you. And that's going to come in the next segment of the presentation. And not only do I know it works, I'm doing it every day with my students. And it works. Just finished a book on the topic, which will be coming out next year. Anyways, yes. Was there any other questions that you feel like needs to be talked about, Ricardo?
Well, Kenji Sato says, there isn't a problem, there is evolution. That's what she said.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we need to evolve. And I think I know what the next stage of evolution needs to look like. So let's dive back into that.
Okay.
So where are we going to look to find the answer? You asked a great question, hacia donde mirar. What are you going to look? And I think what we need to do is miramos atrás, right? And we're going to look back to Benjamin Bloom. Now, everybody knows Benjamin Bloom was the creator of Bloom's taxonomy, Taxonomia de Bloom. But in reality, there's something else that he was much more passionate about than his Bloom's taxonomy. He wrote a paper in 1984 called The Search for Methods of Group Instruction as Good as One-on-One Tutoring. Sorry, it's cut off here. And in that paper, he called it the 2 sigma problem. So it's a mathematical term he uses, the 2 sigma problem. And he compared 3 different methodologies of learning. Now, this is a long time ago, 1984. Conventional learning gives you 1 curve. Mastery learning gives you the 2nd curve, which is 1 standard deviation improvement in student achievement. And if you have a tutorial, a one-on-one tutorial, then it wins. Essentially what he said, is there a way, in fact, here's the quote. He said here, if the research of the 2 sigma problem, let me back up. What he's trying to say is there a way as good as one-on-one tutoring, where you're a wealthy family and you can hire a tutor? Now, most families cannot do that. That's the best way to learn. That's what the research says. And he said, can we find a way, though, that's that good and not cost so much money, right? Not so many teachers necessary. And this is what he said. If the research of the 2 sigma problem yields practical methods that the average teacher or school faculty can learn in a brief period of time and use with little more cost or time than conventional instruction, it would be an educational contribution of the greatest magnitude. It would change popular notions about human potential and would have significant effects on what the schools can and should do with the educational years society requires of its young people. So it was like Bloom was challenging the world to find a better way to teach. And I'm going to be bold and say, problema resoluto. It's been solved. And it's not solved by flipped learning per se, but a combination of flipped learning with mastery learning. Flipped mastery learning. All right. And Roberto, tell me if this doesn't work on the, I want to show you a video from a double sigma classroom. Let's watch.
Okay.
This class is more laid back. It's chill, but you're still learning. Like, you're actually letting in the knowledge. It's like the flipped part of it. Like, you're more independent and you can go at your own pace, but you're still on track. You can't fail. It's kind of impossible to fail this class, to be honest, because you're literally given every resource possible to pass this class. Like, you are able, like, mastery, because you don't move on until you have mastered it. I mean, the test, not necessarily, but like your mastery quizzes, like you know them and like the notes, and then the quizzes are with the notes, and like just every resource that you give us helps us to succeed. Like, you know what you're going to be doing, and you can go ahead. Like, you go at your own pace. You can go ahead. You can be a little bit behind because you get time in class to also work on your stuff. We are capable of learning it on our own with all the resources that you give us.
So this is a student in a class in Estados Unidos from about 4 years ago in a double sigma classroom, a flipped mastery classroom. Now, when I talk about flipped mastery, before we can talk about flipped mastery, let's take a brief moment and talk about flipped learning. And I'm going to talk about the basics of flipped learning. We're going to come back again to Taxonomia de Bloom. And you are all familiar with this, I imagine, knowing that there are the levels: recordar, comprender, aplicar, analizar, evaluar, crear. And if you look at this chart, the vast majority of most teachers' class time, in fact, I will admit my class time when I was a stand and deliver teacher, I spent most of my time at the bottom of Bloom's. But when I and Aaron Sams helped pioneer flipped learning in 2007 and 8, what we realized we were doing is we were flipping Bloom's taxonomy on its head. We were spending less class time on recordar y comprender and more time on aplicar y analizar. And that helped us to realize that the most valuable thing that a teacher has is that face-to-face time they have with their students. When that happened in the pandemic and I was remote with my students, I still had face-to-face time with my students. It was just sitting here in my house in a Zoom room, but I still was able to do that. That's the big idea, is that you want to get the easy stuff. In fact, I want to say this, there's also, I think, the ideal shape of Bloom's taxonomy, if the shape outline represents time, is to spend the bulk of your class time in the middle, medio de Bloom's, all right, aplicar y analizar. And that's what happens in my class every day. My students are spending their time applying and analyzing, and they're using what we say in the flipped learning world, the independent space, when they're alone, working on the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, recordar y comprender. All right, so that's the basics of flipped learning. Let's stop again for a Q&A. Actually, I said I was going to give you the answer. That's coming in the third segment, but let's any questions or thoughts again?
Para aquellos que no dominan el inglés muy bien, más o menos hacer una recapitulación de lo expresado hasta ahora por el doctor Jon Bergmann. Miren, él ha empezado esta plática hablando de que este problema que estamos enfrentando a raíz de la pandemia ha sido un problema mundial, que de alguna forma no estaba preparado el mundo para esta situación y para trabajar a distancia. Entonces, de alguna forma, él dice, nos tomó desprevenidos y sin la preparación suficiente. Por otro lado, él está también recuperando lo dicho por Benjamin Bloom, que es el que habló que lo conocemos muy bien por la taxonomía de Bloom. Y él habla que el aprendizaje idóneo pues es de un aprendizaje de un profesor por alumno. ¿Okay? Y también trae los niveles cognitivos de los que hablaba Benjamin Bloom. Entonces él está explicando cómo estos niveles cognitivos tienen relevancia y tienen pertinencia en el método de aula invertida. Y de tal forma que nuestro conferencista dice que la parte de aplicar y analizar es a lo que más tiempo le dedica en su clase con sus alumnos. ¿Okay? Entonces, hasta ahí es más o menos lo que él nos está presentando. Agradecemos que sus diapositivas también estén traducidas al español y de que él está familiarizado también con esta lengua. y eso también nos habla de su generosidad y de la importancia también que le da al público que tiene de habla en España, en español. Ahora, también aquí hay una pregunta. There's a question here by Elvia Garduño. I'm going to read it. She says, how can I front the problems of reading comprehension to apply flipped learning? That's
Yeah, perfect question. So in a flipped learning environment, the idea is you want to do the hard stuff with your students. And so my guess is if you're teaching them to comprehend literature, whether it's in Spanish or English or whatever it might be, you want to have them practice that, your presence. I mean, the big idea of flipped learning is that you do the hard stuff when you're there as the teacher. Students do the hard stuff with you. They do the easy stuff when they're alone. And so if you would have walked into my class yesterday morning, you would have seen students doing the hard stuff with me walking around and helping my students. And the easy stuff, the information transfer, they got that by watching those ahead of time on a video or reading some text.
Okay, great. That's great.
It's a simple idea, guys. It's not like rocket science to realize what's the best use of your face-to-face class time. I'm going to argue it's not you standing up and introducing new information. They can get that elsewhere, but when they're struggling to apply that information or to analyze that information, that's where they need your help. So putting the right resource, and who is the right resource? It is you, the teacher, a maestro o profesor. It's you who's the most important resource in that class. You need to help your students with the hard stuff. Go back to Bloom's taxonomy. Crear, aplicar, analizar. That's what you want to have them working on in the class. All right.
Okay.
Why don't we go back to the presentation again for, if you will, round 3. So what is this answer? Remember, I've been saying that there's an answer to Bloom's double sigma problem. ¿Cuál es la respuesta? What's the answer? And I think it's when we combine flipped and mastery learning. This is what I believe has solved the double sigma class. Picture here of my classroom that I was in yesterday, okay? And when we think about a flipped mastery classroom, so this is a combination of flipped and mastery. The first thing I want you to know is that there is no whole class instruction. I do not teach all my students at the same time anymore. You can see my students watching a video in class. They're not watching it at the same pace. They look the same. I make videos with a colleague, and you can see what he has. We would make the videos. These are my students from last year. Of course, we're all masked because we did meet in person for part of the year, but everyone was required to wear a mask. So there is no whole class instruction. They do this most of the time at home, but sometimes in a mastery class, you see, actually, let me back up and say mastery. A mastery classroom is the idea, and I'm sure you have this all countries. If you're going to get your doctors, become a doctor, you have to pass the big doctor test, right? You have to pass your boards. I'm not sure if they're called the same thing in other countries, but in the United States, to be a doctor, you have to pass the board exams. Or if you want to be a lawyer, you have to pass if you don't pass this exam, you don't get to be a doctor. If you want to get your driver's license, you have to pass the driver's test. If you don't pass it, you can always take it again. And when you pass it, then you get to be a driver, or you get to be a doctor, or you get to be a lawyer. That's the same idea of a mastery classroom. As the student gets to the end of a unit and they take a test, and if they pass the test, they move on. In fact, today, my students were taking their 3rd test of the year. And some of them passed, vast majority of them passed on their 1st attempt, but some of them did not. And that means they need help, and we're going to remediate and get them some help. But notice there's no whole class instruction. The second thing that's important is that not every student is working at the same pace. They're working at a flexible pace. Now, I use the word flexible. Some people think, oh, everyone gets to work at their own pace. It sounds wonderful. But in my experience as a teacher, is if you don't give some students a pace, some of them won't have a pace. They will just stop working. And so I have students who are unmotivated. I don't know if you do, but I have students who are not motivated to learn. And so what I need to do is find ways to motivate them. And so I have to give them a pace. I've been, in fact, adjusting how they're penalized for not keeping up. And what I've discovered is that some students struggle to keep up because they struggle with the content. And some of them struggle to keep up because they're not very motivated. And determining which one is which is part of the art, I think, of teaching and pushing them in the right way. The third thing that you see in a flipped mastery classroom I think is super powerful is this idea of extreme differentiation. Let's watch a video of my class. Yeah. This was pre-COVID, by the way. And hopefully what you're seeing is you're just seeing that I find that my job, I like to say it this way, is to roam. I walk around the room and help kids. And they're all at slightly different places in the curriculum, and I am helping them a little bit one at a time. One of the crazy awesome benefits of this is that I get so much better teacher-student interactions. I get to help my students all the time. Here I'm working with physics students, they're doing some circuits. I just get to interact with them. I get to know them better. It's just magic, guys, absolute magic. The thing that happens is students by nature are going to be working together. They collaborate together, collaboration of student work. So the students here are working in a group, working together to figure out and solve problems. I'm there to help. And sometimes I help and sometimes I don't. I have to make that decision. Is it best for me or best for them really if I step in and intervene, or do I need to just step back and let them learn on their own? I find the answer is it depends. Formative assessment. So as I'm roaming, I haven't talked about this, but as I'm roaming, I'm spending the time. I carry a clipboard or an iPad. I've actually switched. I used to do in the image, the video you saw, I was using an iPad. I had a green iPad, if you recall. I've now switched to paper. I find just carrying around a clipboard. I've just got a clipboard that I carry around, and that's where I keep track of my students, and it just has been very effective. Old school, analog, I can keep really good track of where each student is at, who's behind in their mastery journey, who is ahead, who's right on target. And what I do is I spend a fair amount of time at the beginning of every class figuring out who needs to be talked to first. It's almost always the kids who are behind in their learning. And then I can kind of push them and say, all right, what is it you're struggling with? How can I help you? For some students, they just need somebody to kind of walk around and encourage them. And some other students need some strong encouragement. Although, let me admit something that happened just this last week. I had a student who I thought was really just slacking off. You know, I don't know if you've had a student like that. It's like, man, dude, you could do this and you're just a total slacker. I didn't say that. But I said, you could do so much better. And then the kid, he said, Mr. Bergmann, do you know that when I go home, I have to take care. I'm like the dad to my little brother, and I have to work. And I've got all these things, and I honestly, frankly, don't have time or that much time to even devote to your class. And my whole perspective changed of this young man just the other day when I realized that I needed to find a better way for him to learn. And so he really gets the content fast. So what I decided to do with him is I said, tell you what if you do like a third of the questions in this assignment? If you can prove to me you know how to do these, then you could skip these other questions. And he was like, really, you do that? I said, I don't care where you learn, but if you know how to learn it, you don't necessarily do all this extra work. And those are the kinds of things that you have to figure out. And as you're doing mastery learning, and hopefully, yeah, you'll find that. Now, summative assessments are interesting things. So like I said, my students are taking some of the tests today, tomorrow. I see my students every other day, so I have a bunch of kids tomorrow. And in my world, my students have to actually score an 80% on their summative assessment. So there's a young lady right there who's taking one of her summative assessments. They do it on a computer. And they have to score 80. If she doesn't score an 80, she has to retake it. And yeah. And so far in this year, every student has passed every single one of my tests with more than an 80 so far. And today, the more took it. Some of them didn't get an 80 on their first attempt, but they will certainly get it on probably the second or the third attempt. All right, and one of the tricks on how to make that work is the software that I use allows me to have thousands of versions of the test. So I don't know if you can kind of see this image, but the software I use, by the way, is Desire to Learn Brightspace. And what I do is these are this chapter 7 test or whatever. Notice that I've got 14 questions in 7.1 mole. You see that deal? Then what I'm expecting is the students are going to I've written a lot of questions. I've written 14 questions. They're randomly going to be assigned one of the 14 questions. That's the first question on the test. The second question is a random question, 1 of 13. I think you get the idea. That means that every time a student sits down, they get a different test that tests the same content. Because if I gave them the exact same test, they would memorize the answers and not really learn it. And so software has really helped on it. Yeah, this whole issue. And then, of course, I'm giving immediate feedback. So this young lady has just taken her big test, right, summative exam, and I am going over with it right that moment. And if she's struggling, I'm able to quickly ascertain. Now, normally in the old days, when I gave the same test on the same day, I wasn't able to do this. But since my students are staggered when they take the test, so as a note, I said they're taking their test today and tomorrow, but that's not really going to happen. My students who are on target are going to take it today. Yesterday, I had students who took it and passed it, and some who didn't. And I'll have some in the next class. So it's staggered over a certain period of time. And then I'm able to spend individual time with every student going over their tests. And number 10, I gamified it. So I actually have a leaderboard. This is a copy of my leaderboard, and it shows where students are at each of these little, there's little magnets that are in my room. They move their magnet when they get past the next assignment. And they love this little thing. It's just crazy. Let's do this. And then probably most important is it's relationship centered. I get to know my students so much better. It's magic, guys. I would seriously encourage you to consider the idea of exploring flipped mastery learning, because you'll get to know your students better. And not just, cognitively, do they understand your material, what you teach, whether you teach literature, or you teach history, or you teach science or mathematics, whatever it is. You're going to find that you get to know your students also on a more personal basis. And it's just humbling to me just how much my students are willing to tell me about their lives. And even yesterday, as I was with a young man, and he was kind of sharing about the struggles of his life, and he comes from a home where his father died, and my heart broke for this young man as I was with him and putting an arm around him. Yeah. So that's the brief introduction of flipped mastery learning. Let's stop again for some question and answer.
Principalmente los mensajes que son de felicitación. Most of the messages are just congratulating the lecture. And I want to say the basic ideas that you have given in Spanish so everybody can follow. Ok, entonces lo que ha dicho a grandes rasgos, está hablando de 11 puntos que voy a mencionar rápidamente. Lo primero que él comenta es que no todos los alumnos tienen que procesar la información al mismo tiempo. Entonces él está enseñándonos unas imágenes donde, por ejemplo, los estudiantes están viendo un video, pero cada quien está viendo el video de diferente forma. Algunos lo pausan, lo regresan, algunos lo dejan correr, porque cada quien tiene su forma particular de aprender, de tal forma que el aula invertida permite que cada estudiante vaya interactuando con la fuente del conocimiento, por ejemplo, en este caso un video, a su propio ritmo, de acuerdo con sus propias necesidades e intereses. Ese es el punto 1 que mencionó. El punto 2 es, no van a avanzar al mismo tiempo, o sea, no van a aprender ni van a cumplir sus objetivos de aprendizaje exactamente al mismo tiempo. O sea, esto en concordancia con el punto 1. Y esto se debe de ir permitiendo y contemplando en el método de aula invertida. Ok, y luego, número 3, que hay que hacer una diferenciación extrema de los estudiantes. Cada quien es diferente, entonces hay que contemplarlo y hay que tomarlo en cuenta en el proceso de aprendizaje-enseñanza. El punto 4 es la interacción profunda que debe haber entre profesor y estudiante. Debe haber una interacción en todo el tiempo, o sea, no se debe de perder la comunicación, no estamos hablando en ninguna forma de perder la comunicación entre profesor y estudiante, sino al contrario, fomentar la interacción. Número 5, trabajo colaborativo. Debe estar también dentro de este método. Número 6, pues hay que contemplar también la evaluación formativa, que la evaluación formativa es aquella en la que se está midiendo la comprensión que el estudiante tiene del tema y que no implica una calificación. ¿Ok? Y después el punto 7 también es evaluación, pero en este caso ya sí la sumativa, que en donde sí ya se debe de generar un puntaje. Ahora, en cuanto a la evaluación sumativa, hay que ver que también está muy relacionada con el punto 8, que se llama que hay miles de versiones de los exámenes. Es decir, hay que evaluar de diferentes formas y siempre cambiar la forma. Para ello, una de las cosas que a mí me ha llamado la atención del doctor Jon Bergmann es que él utiliza mucho diferentes aplicaciones. Por ejemplo, yo he aprendido varias aplicaciones con él. Aprendí Edpuzzle, por ejemplo, Screen-O-Matic, que también él enseña. Y hay que seguir utilizando diferentes aplicaciones para poder favorecer este proceso de aprendizaje-enseñanza. Luego, la parte del punto 9 es la retroalimentación inmediata, que vamos a tratar en este método de en todo momento tener una retroalimentación. Las aplicaciones nos ayudan a tener la realimentación inmediata, los va a favorecer y sí se está esperando este punto. Después, número 10, que en la utilización frecuente de la gamificación o ludificación, ¿ok? Es importante utilizar la gamificación como una buena estrategia para motivar el aprendizaje de los alumnos. Y después él habla de un punto, el 11, que yo creo que es el punto fundamental, y creo que ahí tiene él una motivación muy grande al utilizar el método de aula invertida. Y el punto 11 es que está centrado en la relación, ¿ok? La relación entre profesor y los estudiantes es fundamental. Todo este proceso debe acompañar esta relación, ¿ok? Para que el profesor conozca a sus alumnos, se preocupe por ellos, no nada más en el sentido de lo que están aprendiendo, sino de ellos como personas, ¿ok? So basically, what I have been saying, doctor, is I have been emphasizing some aspects of what you have said. One of the things is that you're always using apps to make your job easier and to optimize what you do. For example, I remember when I met you in la Universidad Iberoamericana, you taught us how to use Edpuzzle and Screen-O-Matic, which are very good
Yes.
apps. And that's also a good strategy to optimize our learning. I mean, to use these kind of apps that will help us reach our goals. Okay, so that's one of the things that I wanted to mention. Another one is that it has to do with gamification that you mentioned, and there is now a new tendency, a new trend that is called neuroeducation, and of course, neuroeducation goes along with what you're saying. and they say that gamification is also oriented into that. And of course, when we listen to you, we know that you're in the same page. And because gamification also attends the emotions of the students, right? So, and also you have that into consideration. It's clear for us. And then I'm saying that some of the great highlights of what you're saying is that flipped classroom, it's centered on the relationship between the students and teachers. And you worry about the students' well-being, not only taking into consideration their learning of the knowledge, but also their, the being of the student as a whole. So I think that it's one of the concerns you have, thinking of the education of a person as a whole being. I don't know if you can tell us more about it.
Yeah. So let me say this. As I've looked at the research on education, and I've read them now for many years, and maybe 8 years, looking at educational research. And I'm going to simplify it here. So if you're an academic in the world, you're going to probably disagree. But I think if you look at all of the educational research, here's my summary. It comes down to just two things. Number one, relationships. Students don't care what you know until they know that you care. And number two, active learning. So relationships plus active learning wins. And if you think about it, if you want to do gamification, active learning. If you want to do project-based learning, active learning. And I think flipped learning is an easy way to get to those things. And flipped learning is by definition active. You can't really not flip your class and not have an active learning classroom. And yeah, build relationship with students and have an active learning. And that's not just me talking. This is research from hundreds and thousands of educational studies that says that same thing. If you're an educational researcher, I would challenge you to look at all the research and see if there's something that's outside of those two buckets, if you will. Yeah. Well, should we take any more questions, or should I go to the last segment of my presentation?
Well, I think you should go. You should continue, go on,
okay.
And afterwards, I think we will be able to discuss
more questions.
Your ideas.
All right, let's go. So what I want us to do now is, this is a video of my class that I took 2 weeks ago. Let's take a look at my class. So I hope you get the idea. My students are actively involved in their learning. And as I close out, I want us to think about some things. I think COVID has definitely been a tragedy. We've all had people, I don't know if you all have, but we've certainly known people, my wife and I, who've died of COVID, who've suffered. It's been a horrible thing for the world. But I also want us to not just look at the negative side. I want us to realize that COVID is also an opportunity. No perdamos esta oportunidad. It's an opportunity for us to rethink what education should have always been like. That's what I want us to do. And if we go back, when we go back, because we will, pandemics all end eventually. But when we go back to school, I want us to not just go back to doing the old way. It doesn't work. You see, what I did is before the pandemic, in preparation, honestly, for my TED Talk, I asked flipped learning teachers and flipped mastery learning teachers in particular to send me pictures. Remember the pictures we saw at the beginning of the presentation? I want to show you what a flipped learning class looks like, what a mastery learning class looks like. Here's a school in Iceland. This was a school for dropouts, students who struggled in school, went from one of the lowest schools. It's a secondary, tertiary institution, so it's like a polytechnic university. And what they have done is they went from the lowest scoring school to one of the highest scoring schools in the entire country. This is one of the great flipped learning teachers in the world, Joanne Ward from Taiwan. Take a look at these pictures. He teaches, this is Khalid. He runs a school of English, teaching students English in Morocco, Marruecos, Singapore, Iran. My friend Reza in his class, his kids are just always active in their learning. I had a chance to visit Escuela de Medicina de Harvard. This is Dr. Richard Schwartzstein, and I was blown away. They've flipped Harvard Medical School. If you're in the university and you want to stay up with the times, just check out what they're doing at Harvard. They're flipping, okay? Okay, this is the first flipped primary school, actually the first flipped school in all of New Zealand, Nueva Zelanda. And it's a primary school, so kindergarten through sixth grade or whatever. And they have become just the talk of New Zealand. And they've done mastery learning. Hong Kong, Nigeria, the United Kingdom, Reino Unido, España, yes, España. By the way, Spain has taken off flipped learning. I wish I had the pictures. I just don't have them. I couldn't find them. Of the first flipped school in Spain. I got a chance to visit this. They have just exploded where there's people dying. That's a bad word. There's people who are just desperate to get into the school because it's so successful. Australia, and China, this is near Chicago where I used to live. Argentina. Now here's an interesting story out of Latin America in particular. The largest instance of flipped learning is happening in Misiones, Argentina. Maybe you've heard of the Iguazu Falls. It is on the border of Brazil and Argentina, and they are flipping with 300,000 students. They're K-12 institutions. They started this program. I had a chance to go and work with them and consulted with them a few years back, and they have like a 6-year plan, and they are in about year 3. And then COVID hit. Maybe now it's year 4 now, I guess. I've lost track. I have to go back and think the math. But anyways, they were ready for the pandemic because they started the process 4 years ago. And they've got a lot to learn. They figured out how to solve the problem with kids who have limited devices. It's a very poor part of Argentina. They figured this out ahead of time. It was just perfect timing for them. This is the first flipped university in the entire world. The complete university is flipped. It's MEF University in Turkey, in Istanbul. I had a chance to visit the school. What an amazing things they're doing at this university. And then here's mi clase. Oh, I did want to say, I forgot about these. I want to mention a couple things, especially for those of you who are at the university. I got a chance to visit Universidad de Monash in Australia. It's the largest university in all of Australia. And I got to visit a class where they're doing some great work with flipped learning. And this is an image from one of their flipped learning classes. But then as I was going around, I was being toured by a professor who's maybe the top flipped professor at the university. He has 1,000 students in his class. And he's flipped it, and it's working brilliantly. But he said, John, let me just take you around. And we walked into this room. I took this picture sitting in the back of the room. You can see how many seats there are. There's maybe 300 seats, and I don't know, you can count them. There's 7 students. This professor was up there lecturing with all the big screens, and there were 7 students there. Because you see what they'd done is they were recording the lectures, they were live streaming their lectures. This is pre-COVID. This is 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe, I forget. And these students said, it's not worth my going to class for me to sit and hear a lecture. And you can see her percentage. This class was supposed to have 300 students in it. There are 300 students enrolled in this class, but they weren't in class. Well, maybe they were online, but the reality was they watched the recording later. What if she was to rethink how she did class and she used this time for active learning? That's what you need to think, guys. You don't want to become this class. You want to be this class. So, sé el cambio. Each of you has a choice to make. And the choice is, are you going to be a part of the change? Are you going to go back to the way it used to be? I can't answer that for you. You have to answer it for yourself. And I highly encourage you to be a part of the change. We shouldn't go back to the old way that we taught before COVID, before the pandemic. It's time for us to upgrade our teaching. Sí el cambio. Gracias. You can find me at jonbergmann.com. I'd encourage you to go there. My website, there's been so much interest in my website, especially in Brazil, that I have somebody translating into Portuguese. Maybe somebody here could be the person to translate my website into Spanish. That would be awesome too. Gracias.
Mire, la mayoría de los comentarios son de felicitaciones. Most of the comments are to congratulate your lecture. And for example, Miss Marta Patricia Garcia Morales said, Dr. Jon, I imagine that the resources you use depend on the group of your students. Is that right? That's her question.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, the apps you use, the applications. Yeah. I mean, how would you select what applications you would use? She assumes that is depending of your student's profile.
There's just not. I see lots of different, tech tools that teachers are using as they flip their classroom. Some people use all Google stuff. Some people use all Microsoft stuff. Some people, for example, use Edpuzzle, like you say. I used to use Edpuzzle, and now I use one called Perusall. I decided I liked it better. Similar, but has some other functions that I like. At some level, I'm not sure it matters. I think it matters at an institution level. So if you're at a particular university, what I would encourage you is to sort of adopt one set of tools, because then it helps the teachers who are struggling with tools to have other people to help them. So I think it streamlines that process, but at some level, it's not that important which tools you use. It's more important that you change how you think about what school is that matters.
Okay. Minerva says, whether in personal or online, we must be more committed to our students to be able to support them. Okay. And then Minerva, she again, Minerva says the COVID epidemic gave us a great opportunity or challenge as teachers to evolve in the way we teach. We have to take advantage of it. Okay. I'm going to also to recapitulate some of the ideas given here in Spanish, okay? Bueno, entonces una de las cosas que han sido importantes en el discurso del doctor Jon Bergmann ha sido que él enfatiza la importancia de la relación que debe haber entre los actores en los procesos de aprendizaje-enseñanza. ¿Okay? Una de las cosas que él dijo, tal cual, dice, a los estudiantes no les importa cuánto sabes, sino hasta que ellos sepan que tú les importas. ¿Okay? Entonces, eso inclusive tiene que ver con lo que decía David Oswald desde hace muchos años, que decía que las clases tienen que tener un componente afectivo, ¿ok? O lo que decía Gabriela Mistral, que si no puedes amar mucho, no enseñes a jóvenes. So I'm mentioning right now that you said that students don't care how much the teacher knows until they know that the teacher cares for them, okay? And I'm saying that David Osbel, I mean, the one that teaches, or the one that proposed significative learning a long time ago, he used to say that there is a very important component in the learning process that has to do with affectivity. Okay, so and also there's a Chilean teacher called Gabriela Mistral that said that to teach, it's important to love a lot. I mean, a good teacher must be good to love. Okay, so that has to do a lot with what you're saying, and yes. Also en español les comento que el doctor dice a los profesores que sean el cambio, be the change, ¿ok? Ustedes tienen que ser el cambio. Hay situaciones diferentes que están pasando que nosotros no podemos cambiar, pero tenemos que hacer lo posible para nosotros mismos ser el cambio, ¿ok? Ahora, there is another question by Eva Chavez Guadarrama. She says, Professor Bergmann, could you please mention the main differences between flipped learning and education based on a face-to-face traditional methodology?
So I still believe in face-to-face teaching. But what happen, as you see my class, I don't stand up and deliver new information. I still believe students need to hear new information. I believe in the power of lecture, but my lectures are on videos. I've made these lecture videos. They're short. Students watch them so that in class, they can wrestle with the difficult concepts. In a traditional classroom, you spend most of your time teaching the stuff, and then you send them home or away to do the more difficult tasks. In my class, they're doing the hard things with me present so that when they get stuck, and they get stuck, I'm there to help them and rescue them. It's so much more effective and efficient. And we could talk, if it matters, but if you look at the research on flipped learning, and there are now over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies on flipped learning that basically says it works. And it works in every subject, whether you're teaching history or engineering or languages or science or mathematics or primary school students or middle school students or university students, or there's even studies that talk about like adult learning at corporate levels. So it works in every subject at every level. It just works. And because it makes sense. It's super, I mean, come on, think about it. When you're stuck, you need the expert with you. To be introduced to the new material, you don't need me. You can do that alone. But when you're stuck, I'm there to rescue you. That's the idea.
Okay, great. Okay, Marta Patricia Garcia Morales said the affective part, it's a missing point in traditional education, and now is starting to be considered, and therefore is going to be stronger or strength. Okay.
Yeah, indeed. This is the time is now. El tiempo es ahora.
Exactly.
To cambio educación. It's time to change education now. If there's ever been a time for us to make the change, it is now. And the pandemic has accelerated the change that was already happening. When we started this movement in 2007, it grew and grew. And then I think some people kind of started to forget about it. But then when the pandemic hit, we said, oh my gosh, we need this so badly. And you need this so badly. But you don't just need this so badly because of the pandemic. You need it after the pandemic.
Correct.
Because it works. And it works better than the old way.
Right. Okay, great. Dr. Bergmann, I have listened to many teachers talk about flip learning and everything. Sometimes it's like a fashion, Everybody talks about the new trends, and like also now many people are talking about neuro education and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes what happens is that they talk about it because they want to look trendy sometimes, but they don't know how to start with it. They talk about it, but they don't do it.
Yeah.
And the institutions also are like that. Oh, they talk about the new trends, but when you see the lessons, they are traditional sometimes, So thinking of teachers that are interested in applying this method, but they don't know how to start, because sometimes we talk about concepts but sometimes it's good for them to know, like in a more basic way, like step by step, how to start, how to.
Let me recommend this, Ricardo. So I wrote a book, one of my books. I wrote a book that's only written in Spanish. So I wrote it with my friend, mi amigo, Dr. Raúl Santiago, profesor de Universidad de Rioja in España. And I just put the link to the book. It's called Aprender al Revés, one of the best books I feel I've ever written. And I wrote it with Raúl. And I put it in our private chat. So there's a way for you to put it in the main comment section so they could see Aprender al Revés, written by Bergmann y Santiago. And I think that's a great place to get started for those of you who want a book in Spanish. Certainly my other books, Flip Your Classroom, is written in Spanish as well. It's been translated into Spanish. You can certainly get all the English versions. And particularly the mastery book, let me just at least give you a heads up. On my computer this morning, I'm doing the final draft of a book. It is done without, I have 3 or 4 more hours of work. That's all I have to finish a book on the flipped mastery learning. It'll be published sometime next year, maybe March, April, something like that, by my publisher. And I have 4 more hours, and then it goes to editors and things like that. So it's not immediate, but in terms of my work on this book is almost done. And I think that would be a great book to pick up if you speak English. Hopefully the book will get translated into Spanish once it's out. It'll be called something like the Handbook of Mastery Learning. I think that would be a great book to pick up. And so I would highly encourage you to pick that up sometime next year. You can certainly go to my website, jonbergmann.com, and if you sign up, you'll get free newsletters. You'll know when books come out or when I publish. I have a blog that you can listen to, or I have a podcast that's on the website, and I also have a blog, both a blog and a podcast that I would encourage people to jump onto. My website is just my name, jonbergmann.com. John has no H and Bergmann has 2 N's, so watch that. But you can find me. I'll put that in the chat too.
Okay, that's great. And also when you show pictures of how of people interacting with flipped learning around the world, I'm curious. Would you think of differences in culture, in different cultures that we have maybe as Latin American countries from other countries? Have you found difference regarding our cultures? Or how different?
Yes and no. So honestly, what I felt like I've seen in Latin American cultures is I feel that Latin American cultures are much more interactive. You are much more of a social culture than Estados Unidos. I wish the United States would be more social. And I think that what I've seen effective flipped classrooms in America, what I have seen is the kinds of things you saw in the pictures of my class, but I think it happens more easily and more readily there than it does in the United States, where it's much more of an individualistic culture. You know, I don't know if you've seen the continuums. There's some cultures that are individualistic and some that are more, I think the word is community orientated or something like that. And in Latin American cultures, I think this is even a better solution. I think it's easier to adopt in Latin American cultures. That said, and I've also seen a lot of pushback and reticence from especially the university system in Latin America, who the professors want to be the ones with all the knowledge to stand up in front and be the professor. But I think they need to give that up. To be nice. I'm not being nice, actually. They need to give that up so that the students can actually have more control of their learning. Because I think you'd be really surprised. I know you would be, about how amazing your students are and what they will learn if you give them some more control. But so I've seen it work in all cultures. So I have lots of examples from Latin American cultures. I've done a lot of work with some universities in Monterrey, Mexico, and know that it's worked very well there. I've been to Pueblo, Mexico City multiple times to share the same idea. I know it works but all of Latin America. Yeah. Brazil is taken off like fire. Argentina. I was in Colombia right before the pandemic. Saw how they're adopting it rapidly. Yeah.
Ok. Bueno, pues miren, queridos profesores, vamos a tratar de aprovechar todos estos conocimientos de la mejor forma y ponerlos en el aula, porque creo que aquí la idea es simplemente ya empezar a actuar y ser el cambio, como lo está diciendo el doctor Jon Bergmann. Y en ese sentido creo que es obligatorio leer el libro. Ya está el vínculo ahí en el chat. Creo que ya lo puse, ¿verdad? El vínculo. Entonces, pues vamos a hacerlo, vamos a hacer la gran diferencia, vamos a empezar a trabajar con esto. And Doctor, I really want to thank you a lot. This has to be a great contribution to the symposium, and I think it's going to change the way we teach. Let me tell you, you have changed the way I teach. I mean, you have made an impact on me, and I think in the same way you're impacting many people's lives, and when you impact the lives of teachers, also you're impacting the lives or their students of the teachers. So it's a great impact. The link of your book is already on the comments, and we will be sure that everybody gets it, because I'm telling the teachers, I mean, they have to read the book. I mean, in order to really change the way they teach, in order to improve the way, in order to upgrade the lessons. Okay, so I mean, you don't know how grateful we are. We really appreciate your generosity. Okay, thank you so much.
And it's awesome. I really appreciate your kind words. It means a lot to me. And it's, guys, yo soy maestro simple. I am just a simple teacher like you. And I am blessed that I helped start a movement. But my hope and the passion of my life is to see all of us, todos los mundos, todos los maestros y profesores, to cambio como enseñar, to change how we teach. It's time. Ahora, tiempo.
Es tiempo de ser el cambio. ¿Ok?
Yeah.
Gracias. Ok.
Gracias.
Okay.
34º Simposio Internacional
SOMECE 2021.
Digital e Innovación Educativa.